Hey everyone, it's ID2 here with Kinami Sport. Earlier this month, Arsenal released a four-part documentary called Only in the Land, which chronicles their journey to winning the UEFA Women's Champions League final. And the documentary to me wasn't just about the aspect of getting to lifting the trophy. It was about transition, the belief, suffering, and overall helping to define what is Arsenal's identity. I wanted to review this documentary not just as someone who loves women's football, but also as someone who had the opportunity to attend the Champions League final in Lisbon. I'm also someone who is dedicated to providing a platform that helps to connect women to moments like this one. So let's talk about the documentary and show what happens episode by episode. The documentary is split up into 4 episodes: transition, growth, belief, and the Arsenal way. So the first episode is all about transition. And honestly, I would say that this episode could have been named accountability because that word seemed to be emphasized throughout this episode. The documentary opens in October 2024, and if you all recall, Arsenal was coming off a really difficult period. They had just missed out on Champions League qualification during the 2023-2024 season, and they started off the 2024-2025 season in the WSL very slow. They also were battered by Bayern Munich in their opening group stage match in the Champions League. At that point, Jonas Edeval exits and Renee Slager steps into the role as interim head coach. Renee had only been on the staff for a year in which she served as assistant coach. Now, what stood out to me was how quickly her leadership helped to shift the energy of the squad. Renee doesn't necessarily come in promising miracles, but she comes in emphasizing accountability, like I stated earlier. Alessia Russo actually says this very clearly. Russo says that Renee turns to the squad and says that everyone has to step up, not just the coach, not just tactically, everyone has to step up. And you see it immediately from the way the squad responds after the losses, in the way Renee encourages them to acknowledge the fans after that big win against Valerenga, and also in how she's not afraid to change the attacking lineup. Arsenal still struggles at times, especially against compact low blocks, but the belief really starts to shift in the team. Like I said, they defeated Valerenga, the Norwegian side, and then they go to Turin where they beat Juve 4-0. And at that time, if you all recall, Juve was going on a 4-match unbeaten streak. So suddenly Arsenal look like a team again. They have the 6 wins. They're unbeaten for the rest of the group stage in the Champions League. And this part of the documentary really shows how their transition with Renee as head coach wasn't necessarily clean, but her leadership really helped to stabilize the chaos very quickly. Into the second episode, which is about growth. This is where Renee is officially named head coach of Arsenal. My favorite moment, aside from Arsenal defeating Real Madrid in the quarterfinal, is when Renee turns to the squad and says, we have to have a purpose to our possession. And of course, that is something we often hear in football, right? We have to have a purpose to our possession. And that line really matters, especially when they go up against Barcelona in the final. We all know Barcelona, their style of football is possession heavy, which is essentially the style of Spanish foot. That is essentially the style of that we've come to know from Spanish football. But when it comes to elite teams, you don't want to just keep the ball just to keep it. You also want to know how to create with it. Players like Alessia Russo and Latin Rubenmoy, they talk about how much influence Renee already had before even becoming head coach. Her attention to detail, her communication, her ability to see the big picture. And that's one thing I noted about Renee in the documentary. I love her communication style. She's not a coach who just yells just to yell. She gets her point across very clearly, and I can see how her style of communication helped to boost the confidence of the team. You see that growth in Arsenal even when the results don't necessarily go their way. They do end up losing to Chelsea in a must-win London derby. They get knocked out of the domestic cups by City and Liverpool, but there's still no panic. Growth doesn't always look like winning trophies, and that's important to note, especially for young girls who are going to be watching this documentary. Sometimes it looks like learning how to lose without breaking your spirit. One thing about this episode is that this is where we see Mariona's arrival in the summer of 2024. Mariona's arrival is huge for Arsenal, not just because of her resume, having won 6 domestic titles with Barcelona, 3 Champions League, and then also a Women's World Cup. Mariona is there because she fits into the league. She fits into the WSL. Mariona talks about the competitiveness of the WSL, and you can tell that she becomes a missing piece to Arsenal's structure, which they really needed. And Jo Curry, who is a journalist for the BBC, she actually talks about this very well. Growth episode really shows how a team learns to suffer together without falling apart. Heading into part 3 of the documentary, which is called Belief, you see that this is the heart of the documentary, at least for me. Arsenal go into the Champions League quarterfinal down 2-0 to Real Madrid. They've been knocked out of every domestic competition, as I stated, from the growth part of the 4-part series. And this is it. This is the only trophy that Arsenal has left to fight for. Jo Curry says no team had ever come back from a 2-0 deficit at this stage of the Champions League. Heading into the second leg of the quarterfinal, Renee isn't sitting there talking about miracles. She's talking about evidence. She says to the team, we've done hard things before. And in the second leg of this quarterfinal, the Emirates atmosphere really matters. If you guys remember, the first leg of the quarterfinal was, you could understand why Arsenal had such a difficult time. The pitch was terribly wet. They had just had a big storm in Madrid, and Renee had already told the team, the ball is not going to move, the pitch is damaged. You need to be aware of that and still be aggressive. Arsenal still struggled despite that warning from Renee in the first leg. But now they're playing at home. They have that home energy to go off of. Press is high. Madrid are pinned back. When they go into the dressing room, Renee says to them, we can do it. We can get 2 goals in 90 seconds. Let's get it done. And they do it. In the second half, they get those 2 goals in 90 seconds. Russo scores first. Chloe Kelly delivers the 2 assists, one to Russo, one to Mariona. And you can hear Renee saying to Katie McCabe, stay composed, but go for a third. So Renee was like, we're going to do this. We're not pushing this to penalties. No more additional time. Let's get it done. That comeback that Arsenal staged against Madrid became proof of concept for everything that came after. And you see it immediately when they face Leon. Renee talks about belief not as hope, but as conviction. And that mindset is what fuels action even before there is proof. When Arsenal overturned the tie against Leon, it definitely doesn't feel accidental. It feels earned. The episode shows why women's football atmospheres matter, why being in the stadium matters. And then we have part 4, which is the Arsenal way and the final. So the final episode ties everything together, past, present, the legacy of Arsenal. We are taken back to 2007 when Arsenal were just semi-professional players. They played 2-legged finals, and a young Leah Williamson is actually pictured in the academy watching Arsenal lift their first European trophy. Then we fast forward to 2025 and Arsenal enter the final as true underdogs against Barcelona. And just to note, Kelly Smith, who is the attacking coach and actually played for Arsenal back in the day, also was an England international. She makes an appearance in the documentary as well. So like I said, we fast forward to 2025 and Arsenal enter the final as true underdogs against Barcelona. Renee defines the Arsenal way. It's patience, forward intent, courage, high press, fast attacks. And before the final, she says something that really stays with me. She says, "Don't fear them. They are very good, but we are very good too." And I actually said this in a video yesterday on my Instagram and TikTok. A lot of teams that go up against Barcelona, they already have that fear in their hearts. And to me, they kill their prey off of that fear that they already sense. A lot of teams tend to count themselves out when going up against Barcelona before they even give themselves a fighting chance. As Arsenal starts to suffer just a bit in the first half of the game, but they adapt and they grow into the game. And really, to me, Arsenal's suffering in the game wasn't as long as it usually was when we saw them play throughout the Champions League. Stina Blackstenius, forever that girl. Stina comes on and she scores that goal and makes it 1-0 against Barca. The contrast between 2007 and 2025 really shows how far women's football has come and how much further it still deserves to go. So, to wrap up my deep dive, I was in Lisbon for that final. When I think of top 5 moments in my life, the UEFA Women's Champions League final in Lisbon is up there. I remember looking around in the stadium and realizing how rare it is for women's football to get moments like that on the biggest stage. And watching this documentary took me back to that moment being there, and it made me emotional because it reminded me why these stories matter and why being there in person matters. And this is exactly why I started Kinami, to connect women to the biggest moments in women's football, not just through content, but through real experiences. So if you haven't watched Only in the Land yet, I really recommend it. And if you were in Lisbon too, I'd love to hear what that day meant to you. Thanks for watching. Drop your thoughts down in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe.